When Elvis Presley stepped on stage, the world didn't just look at him, it surrendered. The hips, the voice, the smile. He wasn't just a singer. He was a cultural earthquake, a force so powerful that even decades after his death, he still feels alive. Yet behind the glittering jumpsuits and the screams of millions, there was another story, one woven with secrecy, pressure, fear, and a series of events that some people believed the world was never supposed to know. On August 16, 1977, when Elvis Presley was found in his Graceland mansion, the official explanation was simple: a heart attack. But the details, those small, uncomfortable, inconvenient details, were not simple. And as people tried to put the pieces together, strange contradictions began to appear, creating a mystery that has lasted for nearly half a century. In the final years of his life, Elvis wasn't the vibrant, rebellious young man America remembered. Friends and staff often described moments where he would disappear inside Graceland for hours, sometimes days, isolating himself in dark rooms with thick curtains drawn. He was fighting fatigue, pain, insomnia, and an overwhelming psychological weight that no amount of fame could fix. According to those closest to him, Elvis was deeply afraid of being forgotten, afraid of losing control, and afraid that some things in his life were spiraling far beyond his ability to manage. One evening, only a few months before his death, Elvis reportedly told a longtime friend something chilling. "There's more going on around me than you know. Things I can't talk about." The friend would later repeat those words in interviews, insisting that Elvis said them with a seriousness he had never seen before. Some people dismiss this as dramatization, but others believe he meant every word. In the last phase of his life, Elvis was struggling with heavy health problems. Medical documents later revealed a combination of hypertension, digestive issues, and long-term dependence on prescription drugs, something common among celebrities of that era, yet far more destructive in Elvis's case. Those who cared for him said he was taking medication simply to stay awake, medication to sleep, medication for pain, medication for anxiety, and medication to counter the side effects of all the other medications. It was a cycle that felt suffocating. But as the world later discovered, there were files, pieces of information, reports, and notes that were not meant for the public. Some of these files were internal documents from investigators who examined Elvis's home and personal belongings after his death. Others were interviews and statements that were collected but never fully disclosed. And then, of course, there were those pieces of information that weren't official at all. Claims made by former staff, friends, and even law enforcement agents who insisted that the public wasn't told everything. According to some insiders, the days leading up to Elvis's death were filled with unusual tension. People said he looked anxious, paranoid even, and that he talked about wanting to get away and disappear for a while. These remarks naturally triggered the widely circulated theory that Elvis planned to start over under a new identity. While there is no solid evidence to support this idea, the coincidence of his behavior and his sudden death only encouraged speculation. What we do know is this: Elvis spent his last night awake. He paced through Graceland, moving from room to room as if searching for something, perhaps comfort, perhaps clarity. At around 4 a.m., he told his fiancée he was going to read in the bathroom. She asked him not to fall asleep there. Elvis smiled and said he wouldn't. That was the last time she saw him alive. Hours later, when Elvis was discovered unresponsive, chaos erupted inside the mansion. Calls were made, people rushed in, and attempts were made to help him. But in the confusion, certain details became muddled. Different witnesses gave different times for when he was found. Statements didn't match. And perhaps most strangely, some items that should have been present were never logged in the police reports. This is where the so-called secret files begin to enter the story. Some former officers have claimed that documents existed which detailed inconsistencies, notes taken during those crucial first hours at Graceland that were later withheld, altered, or locked away. These claims are impossible to fully verify, yet they persist, repeated by people who swear something wasn't right that morning. Others have said that Elvis had personal notes and letters that disappeared after his death, taken from his private areas before investigators searched the room. Graceland staff members later admitted that the house was not sealed immediately, meaning that objects could indeed have been moved, taken, or rearranged before law enforcement properly documented the scene. And then comes the part of the story many fans don't know. There were federal documents, minor but real, that mentioned Elvis Presley. They had nothing to do with conspiracies, but their existence opened the door for speculation. Some believe that Elvis served as an unofficial informant at one point, strictly voluntarily, during his interactions with federal agencies. Others think he feared criminal elements related to individuals he met throughout his career. There is no definitive evidence to support any major theory, but the presence of even small official notes created more questions than answers. Yet the true tragedy of Elvis's final days might be far simpler than the mysteries suggest. Friends later said that Elvis felt trapped by fame, trapped by expectations, trapped by a body that could no longer keep up with the legacy he was expected to perform. He was living in the shadow of his younger self, and that shadow grew darker every year. He carried the weight of millions of fans' dreams while battling his own private storms. He tried to smile. He tried to stay strong. But behind closed doors were moments of profound loneliness that no spotlight could illuminate. In the end, whether secret files exist or not, whether documents were locked away or simply forgotten, the deepest truth remains emotional rather than political. Elvis Presley was a man who gave everything he had to the world, yet felt more isolated than almost anyone could imagine. His last night was not just the end of a legend. It was the culmination of years of physical exhaustion, emotional pain, and a life lived under relentless pressure. The files, the claims, the theories, they may continue to circulate forever. But perhaps the real question we should ask isn't what happened to Elvis. The question is, what happens to a person when the world demands more from them than any human can give? Elvis Presley changed music, culture, and millions of lives. But behind the stardom was a fragile, tired man who needed rest, long before he ever found it. And in the quiet moments of his final night, away from the screaming crowds and the blinding lights, Elvis found himself face to face with the one thing even he could not outrun: the truth that being adored is not the same as being understood. Today, the mystery of those files, whatever they do or do not contain, remains part of his legend. A reminder that even the brightest stars cast the darkest shadows, and that some stories were never meant to stay in the spotlight.